You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin.
I had never felt more out of place than I did that night at the Spencer mansion. It was a palace, the kind you only see in magazines, with chandeliers hanging down like glass raindrops. The polished floors reflected everything, shiny, perfect, and cold. I sat at the dining table, my back stiff, trying to keep my hands from trembling as Lisa, with her designer dress and perfect smile, adjusted herself next to me. Her parents, Frank and Gloria, made a whole spectacle out of me. Frank, the type of guy who never needed to raise his voice but still managed to make you feel small, was grilling me with questions about my business. His eyes glinted with a mixture of condescension and judgment, as if my work didn't quite measure up to the kind of success he was used to. And Gloria, she was even worse. She was the queen of passive-aggressive comments, the kind that slid under your skin before you even realized what had happened. She smiled and said something about how nice my outfit was, but there was that edge to it, the kind that made me feel like I had just failed some invisible test. Lisa, of course, sat there as the perfect daughter, nodding at everything her parents said, agreeing with their little barbs, pretending everything was just fine. The perfect wife in the perfect world. It felt like I was the only one who wasn't playing along, the only one who saw the cracks behind their smiles. I used to tolerate it, let it roll off my back. But tonight, I couldn't. As Frank went on about how I should be grateful for the opportunities Lisa's family had given me, something snapped inside me. I had spent years trying to fit into this world, trying to pretend that their treatment of me didn't bother me. But now, as the scent of expensive wine and roast chicken filled the air, it felt like the last straw. It wasn't just the way they treated me. It was the way Lisa stayed silent, the way she let them do it. I realized in that moment, I was done. I had tolerated their insults long enough. Something was going to change tonight, and it would be me who made that change. The conversation dragged on, every word from Frank and Gloria like another pinprick. I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I kept my mouth shut. Frank was on a roll, talking about how important it was to work hard and earn your place, all while giving me that look, the one that said he thought I hadn't earned anything. "Mark," he said, like he was teaching me a lesson, "it's all about hustle. Your humble origins, as you call them, shouldn't hold you back. It's about making the right connections, showing the right kind of drive." I didn't bother answering. What would be the point? Frank wasn't interested in hearing anything that came from me, just the sound of his own voice. I could almost taste the bitterness in the air, the way his words slid over the table, meant to push me down. Gloria, of course, couldn't let it go. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned my shirt. "I don't think I've ever seen you wear a proper suit to dinner, Mark. You really ought to consider how you present yourself." I forced a smile, the kind I'd worn 1,000 times before, the kind that was thin and stretched too tight. "Just not my style," I said, hoping the words would settle the way she wanted them to. But I could feel her judgment creeping in, sharp as a blade. Gloria didn't miss a beat. I suppose that's true. People with different backgrounds have a harder time understanding these things. She glanced at Lisa for a fraction of a second, and that look, they were in it together. All of them, laughing at me, in their own quiet, insidious way. I didn't know how much longer I could stand this. My hand was gripping the knife harder than it should have been, my fingers starting to ache from the pressure. I watched the silver blade gleam under the soft lighting, the smooth curve of it, no jagged edges. Clean. Precise. It wasn't going to get me anywhere, but damn, it felt like the only thing I had control over at that moment. I could hear Lisa's soft laughter in the background, distant, disconnected. She was sitting there, so perfect, so composed, while they took turns kicking me in the ribs. And she said nothing. Not once. I looked at her. She was avoiding my gaze, like she couldn't even bear to look me in the eye. Her fingers tapped lightly against her wine glass, like she was waiting for something. No, not waiting. She was anticipating it. I could see it in the way she shifted in her seat, the subtle way she glanced between Frank and Gloria. Something was coming. I didn't know exactly what, but I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just another dinner. Not tonight. And then it happened. Lisa cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the quiet like an echo. I filed for divorce." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach lurched, the food in my mouth suddenly turning sour. I looked at her. Her face was stone, Her eyes locked on some distant spot above my shoulder. No emotion. Not one. Just flat, detached. She handed me the papers with all the sincerity of a business transaction. Lisa. I tried to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Frank and Gloria exchanged a quick, satisfied glance. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Gloria muttered under her breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's about time." I didn't react, didn't flinch. I just set the papers down in front of me, like I was staring at a contract. Something to be dealt with, not something that could break me. Slowly, I reached for my phone and pressed the button to call security. "Remove the Spencers from the property," I said, my voice quiet but clear. Lisa froze. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Frank's face twisted, first in confusion, then in anger. Gloria's smug little smirk faltered, just for a moment, before she quickly masked it with something closer to disbelief. It was too late. The moment was already turning. They had no idea what was coming next. And I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I just stared at the divorce papers sitting in front of me, the thin sheet of paper that seemed to mock everything I thought I had, everything I'd built. Lisa's face was completely blank, like she wasn't even there. No tears, no anger, just nothing. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, like it was waiting for me to react. But I didn't. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just set the papers down on the table, the sound of them sliding across the polished wood feeling too loud in the stillness. My hand was steady, like I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I reached for my phone, my fingers cold against the smooth glass screen. I dialed security, my voice low but firm. "Get the Spencer family off my property. Now." It was simple, efficient, but it threw the room into chaos. Frank's eyes narrowed, and his face twisted into something that looked almost confused. Gloria's smirk dropped, just for a second, before she scrambled to cover it up with a forced cough. Lisa didn't move, didn't say a word. She just sat there, frozen, like someone had turned her into a statue. Frank finally leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You can't do this, Mark. You don't get to throw us out like." I didn't even look at him. I didn't need to. I knew what he was going to say. I'd heard it all before. Instead, I calmly slid the phone into my pocket and turned my attention back to Lisa. She was staring at her lap now, her fingers twisting together like they were trying to keep her grounded. Her breathing was shallow, like she was just as shocked as I was, but too scared to show it. I didn't know if she was regretting what she'd just done or if she was waiting for me to fix it all. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Not after everything. She had made her choice, and now, so had I. "Lisa," I said, keeping my voice low. "Is this really what you want?" She didn't look up, didn't respond. I could see the fear in her shoulders, the tension that ran through her body, but she wouldn't admit it. She wouldn't even look me in the eye. And maybe, for the first time, I realized she never really had. Frank's face was turning red now, his hands gripping the table like he was trying to steady himself. "You don't understand what you're doing, Mark. This house, this life, you're about to ruin everything." The smug confidence that had been there all night was slipping away. Gloria was sitting straight back now, her expression tight, like she was calculating her next move. I'd seen that look before, but this time, it didn't faze me. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I did. Frank opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "You have 24 hours to leave." The words were simple, direct, and final. "Pack your things and get out. This house is mine now, and I'm done." They just stared at me, wide-eyed, like they couldn't quite wrap their heads around it. For all their wealth, their power, their control over everything, they hadn't seen this coming. They hadn't realized how far I'd come, or how much I'd been holding back. Lisa didn't say a word. She just kept staring down at her lap, her hands still twisting in that nervous, defeated way. I could feel the walls closing in on us, the silence between us growing thicker, heavier. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It wasn't just a family gathering gone wrong. This was the end of everything I'd been pretending to be, pretending to want. I didn't look back at her as I walked toward the door. "Security will escort you out," I said, my voice carrying across the room. Frank opened his mouth again, but Gloria cut him off with a sharp, irritated glance. She stood up quickly, smoothing down her dress, and started toward the door, muttering something under her breath. But it wasn't the words that stung. It was the look in her eyes. That cold, calculating gaze that had always seemed to be aimed at me. It was now aimed at me, yes, but with something else, too. Something like fear. I didn't care. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to sit at their table and play their game. They didn't matter anymore. And Lisa? She had made her choice. I could feel the weight of that decision, that finality, pressing on me. But for the first time in years, I didn't mind it. The silence in the room wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was liberating. And when I walked out of that room, I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I had built for myself, even if it meant leaving all of them behind. Frank and Gloria were still standing there, stunned, trying to wrap their minds around what had just happened. Frank was the first to recover, his voice rising in indignation. "You can't do this, Mark. You can't just throw us out of our own house like it's nothing." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, letting the weight of the moment settle in. "You're wrong, Frank," I said, calm as could be. "This house isn't yours. It never was." Frank's face twisted, a mixture of disbelief and anger, but there was something else in his eyes, something darker. Gloria, who had been standing behind him, her arms crossed, narrowed her eyes at me. The usual disdain she wore like armor was gone now, replaced by an unsettling sense of vulnerability. "What do you mean? It's not ours?" Gloria demanded, her voice cold but shaking. 3 years ago, I began, still keeping my voice steady. "I bought this house. It's mine. I've been paying the mortgage, the taxes, everything. You didn't even know it was in my name." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a legal folder, thick with papers. I slid it across the table to them, the sound of the folder hitting the polished surface like a hammer on glass. Lisa didn't speak. She just stood there, her back stiff, her lips pressed together in a thin line. I could see her hands trembling slightly, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't know what to say either. Frank reached for the folder, his fingers shaking. He flipped it open, eyes scanning the documents inside. But his expression didn't change. I could see his mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Gloria leaned over his shoulder, her lip curling as she read through the papers, then looked up at me. "You're lying," she hissed, her voice tight with panic. "This isn't possible. You can't just take everything from us." I remained silent, letting the weight of the truth sink in. Gloria's words were starting to sound hollow, like she was grasping at straws. I wasn't going to argue with them. The deed was right there, in black and white. "You've been living in my house, using my money, and you had no idea," I said. "You've been walking around here for years like you own the place, and you've never once stopped to ask who was actually paying for it." Frank slammed the folder shut, his face turning a shade of red I'd never seen before. "This is ridiculous. We'll fight this, Wheel." "You won't," I interrupted, my voice still even, still controlled. "You don't have the leverage anymore, Frank. I've been paying for this place, my money, my decisions, my house. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do with it." Frank's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. Gloria looked like she was about to speak again, but something in her eyes stopped her. She took a deep breath and stepped back, her shoulders tense, her gaze flicking between me and the documents. Lisa hadn't moved an inch. She was still standing by the table, staring at the papers, but I could see her breath quickening. The control she'd always clung to was slipping through her fingers like sand. I could feel the shift in the room. I could feel them all scrambling, trying to regain a semblance of control over something they thought was theirs. But it was too late for that. Lisa looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark, please," she started, her eyes wide, desperate. Can't we talk about this?" I didn't answer her right away. I just looked at her, taking in the way her face was softening, the way her mask was cracking. She was falling apart, and it was clear she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Maybe she hadn't wanted any of this. Maybe she never wanted to leave them behind. But she had. And now, I wasn't going to fix it. "No," I said finally, shaking my head. "There's nothing to talk about, Lisa. You made your choice. And so did I." Her eyes flicked over to Frank and Gloria, and I saw a flash of something. Guilt. Maybe, or maybe just the realization that there was no going back. But whatever it was, it faded quickly, replaced by the cold, hard look of someone who had lost their grip. "Get your things," I said to them, my voice firm. "You have 24 hours. I'll have security escort you out if needed. Frank opened his mouth to argue again, but the words never left his lips. I didn't need to hear them. The game was over, and they knew it. I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty room behind me. The power was mine now. Finally, the silence in the room was suffocating, thick enough to choke. Frank's face had drained of color, his eyes wide with shock, as though he couldn't quite wrap his mind around the reality I'd just laid out for him. He opened his mouth, like he was going to say something, but nothing came out at first. His lips twitched, then curled into something that was supposed to look like a sneer, but came across as desperate. "You can't do this," he finally managed, his voice strained, a little too high-pitched. "This house, it's always been for the family. You don't just take everything from us." Gloria stood next to him, hands trembling, her expression twisted with a mixture of defiance and fear. She stepped forward, shoulders squared, like she could somehow make this right by asserting control. "You can't just," she cut herself off, her voice faltering as she looked at the papers again. "You've been lying to us, Mark. This was always meant for the family. For us. Your marriage, this house, it's all part of that." I didn't move. I didn't have to. They were unraveling right in front of me. Frank's hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought it might crack under the pressure. He looked at me like I was the one who had betrayed him. But it wasn't me. I was just the one finally willing to stop pretending. I glanced at Lisa. She was still standing there, her hands pressed to her mouth, her face pale, her body trembling as if it was only now sinking in. Her eyes met mine, wide, pleading, like she didn't recognize me anymore. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Can't we just work this out? Please." Her voice was small, desperate. I took a breath, but it didn't help. My chest was tight, like I couldn't breathe around the weight of everything that had built up over the years. I turned my gaze away from Lisa and looked at Frank and Gloria, who were watching me with a mixture of confusion and rage. Frank's chest was heaving as he tried to speak again, but I cut him off with a simple shake of my head. "No, Lisa," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "We can't work this out. Not anymore. We've been living a lie, all of us. This marriage has been a series of compromises, each one chipping away at something important. But you don't get to just erase it with a few empty words. You don't get to pretend this isn't happening." Lisa's face crumpled then, and for a moment, I saw her for who she really was. Someone who was scared, unsure, and maybe, just maybe, starting to realize how deep the cracks went. But I couldn't fix it. Not now. I could feel the heat in my chest, the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I kept it in check. The last thing I wanted was to be like them. Desperate. Powerless. Pretending everything could be undone with a few words. "I've been carrying this marriage for years, Lisa," I continued, my voice firm. "And for what? For you? For them?" I gestured to Frank and Gloria, who were still standing there, still in denial. "You don't get to come in here and pretend that this is just another fight. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. This betrayal, it's the last straw." Frank's face contorted with disbelief. "You can't just take everything from us, Mark. This house, everything, was never just yours to take." I shook my head slowly. "You're not listening, Frank. You never did. This was mine. It always has been. And now it's time for you both to leave." Gloria's eyes flashed with indignation, her hands curling into fists. "You'll regret this, Mark. You don't know who you're messing with. We won't go quietly." But there was no fire in her words now, just a trembling threat, empty and hollow. I looked over at the door, where security had been standing, quiet as shadows. "Security," I said calmly, my eyes meeting theirs. "Escort Mr. and Mrs. Spencer off the property. They have 24 hours to pack their things and leave." I turned back to Frank and Gloria. The control I'd finally found felt solid, real. Like it was mine, and no one could take it away from me anymore. Their bluster, their power, none of it mattered now. I'd broken free, and I wasn't going back. Frank opened his mouth, likely to say something else, but he stopped himself. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't something he could fight. It wasn't something he could talk his way out of. The game had changed, and it was one he hadn't been prepared for. Lisa, standing silently behind me now, didn't say another word. She just stared at me, her face a portrait of confusion and loss. For a moment, I thought about saying something more to her, anything to explain why this had to happen. But I didn't. I couldn't. She was gone. The woman I thought I knew had been hiding behind too many layers, and tonight, she'd stripped them all away. Frank and Gloria stood motionless, watching me, still processing the fact that everything they had tried to control was slipping from their hands. Slowly, they turned, Gloria still muttering something under her breath as she followed Frank out the door. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, not completely, but lighter. This was the beginning of me taking back control. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The whole thing felt almost surreal. I stood off to the side, watching the Spencer family scramble to gather their things, the weight of it finally sinking in. There was Frank, barking orders at the moving crew like he was still in charge, but his voice lacked its usual command. It was shaky, rough around the edges, as though he couldn't quite believe what was happening. He was trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left, but it was obvious he was rattled. The man who once ruled every room he walked into was now reduced to this, begging movers to wrap his possessions like they were fragile treasures. Gloria was no better. She flitted around, ordering people to handle her things with care, even though half of what she was grabbing looked like it had been pulled out of some expensive flea market. She kept her chin high, trying to hold on to some illusion of control, but I could see the cracks forming. She was unraveling too. Then there was Lisa. She hadn't left the room since the security team came through. She was moving aimlessly, her feet dragging, eyes down, like she didn't know where to go or what to do next. And I couldn't even bring myself to care. "Mark," she said, stepping up to me in the hallway, her voice tight, strained. "Please, let's talk. We can fix this. We can." I turned to face her, keeping my distance. The look in her eyes, desperation mixed with something else I couldn't place, wasn't enough. "Not anymore. We're done, Lisa," I said, my voice low but firm. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. Now you live with it." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. I watched her, feeling nothing but cold resolve. A part of me wanted to feel bad for her, but the truth was, I'd spent too long being the one who gave in. Now it was my turn to be done. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but her hands were shaking. "I never meant for it to end like this," she whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't." I shook my head, cutting her off. "Doesn't matter now. You've done what you've done. I don't owe you anything." She stared at me, her eyes flicking between anger and confusion, but I wasn't about to soften. I wasn't about to fall back into whatever twisted dance we'd been doing. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "I just want a chance to make it right. I'm not your fixer," I told her, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "You never needed one. And look where that got us." She flinched, like I'd slapped her, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I turned away, leaving her standing there, frozen in the hallway. Gloria appeared next, sliding into the room like a shadow. Her eyes locked on me, full of venom, but beneath it, there was something else, something desperate. She tried to smooth her hair back, trying to maintain her usual composure, but I could see the cracks. "You don't know what you're doing, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of condescension and guilt. "This isn't just about a house. It's about family. My family." I didn't even flinch. She could talk all she wanted, but the mask was gone. I saw through her now, and I wasn't about to play her game. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my tone cold. "I'm making sure you and Frank get exactly what you deserve." Her lips quivered, and she stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more pleading. "Mark, please. You can't just throw us out like this. We worked so hard to build everything. And you've always been part of that. You've always been family." Her words were meant to hit me, to twist something inside, but I didn't feel anything. No guilt, no regret, just the weight of truth. "You never treated me like family," I said flatly. "You used me. You wanted my connections, my status. And now that you don't have it anymore, you want to act like it's all a mistake. But it's not. I was never one of you." Her face faltered. For a second, I saw the woman she really was, the one who'd put up this entire facade for years. Then she straightened, trying to recover, but it was too late. "You'll regret this, Mark," she said, her voice shaking with the kind of anger she wasn't used to feeling. "You'll regret throwing your family away." "Not if I live to be 100, I replied, without a hint of hesitation. Gloria's eyes blazed, but there was nothing left to fight for. Not here. Not anymore. I turned my back on her, walking away from the chaos, the noise, the wreckage they were leaving behind. I didn't need to watch them pack. I didn't need to see them try to hold on to their illusion of power and wealth. It was all falling apart, and I was the one watching it crumble from a distance. And in the silence that followed, I realized that I had been free for the first time in years. No more pretending. No more lies. Just the weight of my own choices. And that was all I needed. I stood by the front window, watching them. Lisa, Frank, and Gloria, their backs turned as they dragged boxes and bags to their cars. The whole thing was a spectacle, awkward, rushed, and desperate. I could hear the thud of furniture being shoved into the trunks, the sound of something heavy scraping against the gravel, the clinking of glass and metal. It should have felt like a win, watching them scramble, watching their carefully constructed world crack. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a strange kind of peace. This house, the place that had felt like a prison for so long, suddenly felt different. It felt like mine now. All mine. I wasn't trapped here anymore. I wasn't pretending to fit in, pretending to be part of a family that had never wanted me, that had only ever used me. I glanced around the room. The chandeliers overhead, the expensive furniture, it was all the same, but it was mine. And for the first time, I wasn't looking at it through someone else's eyes. It wasn't about their expectations, their standards, or their approval anymore. It was just me. I let my mind wander for a second, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to be what Lisa's family wanted. How much I'd sacrificed just to be accepted into their world. I'd played the role of the successful, humble, grateful son-in-law, trying to fit into a world that had never truly accepted me. It had all been a game, a show I'd put on for them, and for Lisa. But they had always looked down on me, even when I'd played the part. And Lisa? She'd gone along with it. She had played her part, too. But what I'd learned tonight was that we were both pretending. Pretending to be happy, pretending to be a family. And now, with them gone, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't have to carry their weight. I saw Lisa again, standing by the door, her shoulders slumped, watching as Frank and Gloria shoved the last of their things into the back of a car. She looked lost. There was nothing left for her here, and she knew it. I didn't move. Didn't offer to help. Didn't say anything. Finally, she came over, hesitant. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. "Mark, please, we can still fix this. We can still." I didn't let her finish. I wasn't going to hear it anymore. I wasn't going to fall for it. "No," I said quietly, my voice almost too calm. "There's nothing left to fix. You made your choice, and so did I." She winced, as if my words were a slap. "Mark, please." I cut her off again. I wasn't going to listen to any more empty apologies, any more pleading. "No more apologies, Lisa. You showed me who you are. And I'm done." Her face faltered, like I'd just ripped something out of her. She took a step back, blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. She never had been. She was just another part of their world, another role to play. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for showing me your true colors. Now I can finally move on." She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, looking at me like she was waiting for something. But I wasn't going to give her anything. There was nothing left to give. I turned away from her and went to the window, watching as Frank and Gloria finished loading their cars. Frank slammed the trunk down with more force than necessary, and Gloria, still trying to maintain some sense of dignity, adjusted her designer sunglasses. She looked like she was putting on a show, but the cracks in her armor were obvious now. They were losing everything they'd worked so hard to control. I felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. It was over. I was done. I was free. I wasn't the man I had been when I first walked into this house. I was something else now, something stronger, something more certain. I had spent too many years trying to make them happy, trying to fit into their world. But now, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I was in control of my own life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of excitement for what was to come. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I watched them drive away, the last traces of their presence fading with each passing second. Lisa's car was the last to leave. She looked at me one last time, and for a split second, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. She just drove off, the taillights disappearing into the distance. I stood there, my hand resting on the cool glass of the window, and finally let myself breathe. This was my life now, and I was finally ready to live it. A few days after they left, the messages started coming in. The first was from Lisa. It was a text, simple, almost pitiful. "Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I've been so blind. Please let's talk. I didn't mean for it to end this way." I read it twice, feeling that familiar tug in my chest. I thought about her, about everything we had been, but I didn't feel the same way anymore. I didn't feel any pull to fix it. I wasn't the guy I had been when I was with her, so I didn't respond. I just deleted it and went back to work. There was no reason to revisit the past. Not for me, and certainly not for her. Then came Frank. He left a voicemail, the first I'd gotten since all of this went down. His voice was a mess, strained, as though he'd practiced what he wanted to say, but it didn't come out right. "Mark, I never meant for things to escalate like this. You know, things just got out of hand. I think we can still move forward, you know? We can make things right, together. Let's just, have a conversation. Call me when you get this." I listened to it once, maybe twice, then hit the delete button without a second thought. He wasn't sorry. He was sorry he'd lost control, but not sorry for how he'd treated me. Frank didn't care about the damage he'd done. He cared about fixing the image he'd spent years perfecting. I wasn't interested in that. A week later, I walked into my office, the quiet hum of the morning routine already settling in. My assistant had left a message on my desk. It was short. "Gloria Spencer is here. She's asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent." I didn't even have to think about it. I stood up, walked out into the waiting area, and saw her standing there, still trying to look pristine, still in her designer clothes, her makeup perfect, as though nothing had changed. She smiled when she saw me, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She was desperate, and it was obvious. "Mark," she started, her voice strained but calm, trying to hold herself together. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please, you have to understand. None of us knew what we were doing. I didn't know how much you had been contributing. I didn't know how hard you worked. If I had, I never would have treated you that way." I crossed my arms, looking at her, feeling that same old disgust I used to feel when I'd see her manipulate people with just a smile. But now, it didn't faze me. I was no longer playing her game. "Gloria," I said, my tone even, but sharp. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't care. I wasn't your family, and I wasn't your equal. I was just someone you used to make yourselves feel better." Her face flickered with something, maybe embarrassment, or maybe just the realization that she had no more power here. "Mark, please. You don't understand. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We were just worried about our image. You know how hard it is to keep everything together, to keep up appearances. You were always part of that. And we need you back. We need your help." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the way she was trying to twist the situation to fit her narrative. But I wasn't buying it anymore. The facade they'd built, the lies they'd lived, it was all falling apart. And now, she wanted me to come back and fix it? I wasn't her savior. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not going back into that world. Not for you. Not for Frank. And not for Lisa. You all have your way of doing things, and I have mine now. You don't get to drag me back into your chaos just because you've realized it's falling apart." Her eyes hardened, the control slipping further out of her reach. "You'll regret this, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but full of venom. "You'll regret walking away from us." I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw exactly who she was. A woman who'd spent her entire life using people, who'd never known a real relationship, who'd lived for the approval of others and never once cared to ask if it was worth it. "I won't regret it," I said quietly, stepping around her to walk back to my desk. "I'm done with all of you." I heard her heels click on the floor behind me as she walked out, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her go. The truth was, I was done with the Spencer family and everything they represented. As the door shut behind her, I sat down at my desk and finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I was free, and no amount of their apologies, their guilt, or their manipulation was going to change that. They didn't get to control me anymore. They never had. I picked up the phone and made a call to my lawyer. It was time to start planning my next move. The Spencer family had tried to break me, but I wasn't broken. Not anymore. A year later, I sat at the dinner table, surrounded by the people who actually mattered. My closest friends, people who had supported me when I had nothing to offer except myself. It was a quiet evening, but it felt like a celebration, even though no one said it out loud. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the easy conversation, it was all real. No pretenses. No games. I didn't need to look around the table to feel the difference. I could feel it in the air. I wasn't trying to be someone I wasn't anymore. No more worrying about fitting into a world that never saw me for who I was. I was at peace with myself now. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt seen, not for my bank account, not for my connections, but for just being me. My friends knew who I was, flaws, mistakes, everything, and they still showed up. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to twist myself into something else to get their approval. I looked out across the table at the familiar faces, each of them smiling, comfortable in their own skin. We didn't need the expensive food or fancy decor. It was the people that made the night. The warmth in the room was enough. Later, after the plates were cleared, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the backyard, turning the sky into a tapestry of oranges, purples, and pinks. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool air wash over me. The house, my house, stood tall and silent behind me. It felt different now. What had once been a cage, a place that reminded me of all the things I couldn't control, was now a home. It wasn't just the walls, or the furniture, or the expensive finishes. It was the freedom I felt here. It was the space to finally breathe, to make my own decisions, to be the person I wanted to be without the weight of other people's expectations. I had built this life for myself. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far I had come. The months after the Spencers left had been hard, messy, raw, but I had rebuilt. I had pushed through the pain and the anger, used it to fuel the changes I needed to make. Now, standing here, on the edge of this new chapter, I realized something. All those sacrifices had led me here. It had been worth it. The sunset was almost gone, the last bits of light slipping below the horizon. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last year settle into me. There was a sense of calm, like I had finally made peace with everything that had happened. The Spencer family, with their lies and their games, they were a part of my past now. They had no hold over me anymore. I looked out over the view, the city lights starting to twinkle in the distance, and I realized something else, too. I wasn't just looking at a sunset. I was looking at the future. For the first time, it felt like mine.